Greetings, Wanderer, and welcome back to my lair. It is I, Remortis, Necromancer extraordinaire. And it seems you wish to master the arts of the dead after all. And what better way than to command an army of the undead to do your bidding? After gathering my notes and much deliberation, I am prepared to finally share this chapter of the Necronomicon with you. We'll go over the basics of summoning, how to make the best use of each type of minion, and what their strengths and weaknesses are. Then we shall go over the various spells and skill focuses that will be able to support your army, as well as going over which aspects and items we'll need to look for in order to make our army the strongest it could be. And lastly, we'll take a deep dive into the Paragon system to figure out which paths and options are available to you. A disclaimer, however, before we begin. This should be taken in like recipes from a cookbook. Once you understand the ingredients, you can pick and choose whatever you'd like to change or replace. This chapter of the Necronomicon is to have a comprehensive understanding of our minions and how they truly work. Their power, supporting skills, and abilities will undoubtedly wax and wane over time. With all that said, let us begin. This is the Book of the Dead. This is how we can customize and choose which minions that will be serving us. They each have their own purpose and specialties. Let's start off with the Skelelton Warriors. By default, when you first begin your adventures in Sanctuary, you'll be given the Skirmishers, which are just standard warriors who just fight with a melee weapon. They do a little more damage than the other skeletons, at least in single targets, but they have less life. Two options you can choose between the Skirmishers is to have an additional warrior, which is a pretty solid choice. It's really good on boss fights that are single target, as you get an extra body, and that will scale with the rest of your abilities. The other option you can have is giving your skeletons a chance to do more critical strike damage as well. This can be useful if you have higher critical strike through your armor. So, as mentioned before, the Skelelton Warrior Skirmishers are pretty solid at single target damage. They're good at fighting stronger monsters, and they're pretty weak in groups. So keep that in mind. Typically, when you're about to go to the end of a dungeon or fight a boss, I will switch to my Skirmishers if I know that it's a single target fight. And if I know that the boss doesn't necessarily do multiple strong attacks. So otherwise they'll just wipe the floor with your skeletons. Moving on to our defenders. These are more durable skeletons. They fight with a sword and shield. They can be quite tanky and can hold the line for your weaker skeletons and for yourself. There are two different types of defenders. One that lets you negate damage every 6 seconds. This is pretty solid, especially if you know the boss has slow, powerful attacks, and this make your warrior or your defenders a lot more durable and survive longer. And then you also have a Thorns variation, and I still have yet to truly see the potential of this this focus, as you need a lot of specific pieces of gear that will enhance your Thorns to the best capability. It is possible, but I have yet to see it because it requires a lot of scouring lands for specific types of gear with thorns on it. And then lastly, we have our Reapers, to excel in AoE and group fighting, as every 10 seconds they will swing their scythe around and cleave everything around them. They're pretty good on boss fights too, however, but the Skirmishers will ultimately do more damage than the Reapers, but the one thing that the Reapers have going for them is their second option. Their first option, however, as you can see here, Reapers attacks if you have a lot of crowd control abilities, which you could totally run if you desire. They will reduce the cooldown of their swing, making their AoE attacks a lot quicker. But their better option, I believe, is their ability to generate corpses, which will help fuel the rest of your attacks and your minions as well. This can be very useful on boss encounters, which do not have a lot of cannon fodder that they throw at you, so you might not be able to generate corpses as well. So this can help you create more corpses and keep your minions alive, plentiful, and also a combination with your other spells. Just a recap of all of that. Skirmishers are really good at single target damage. If you decide if you're going to do a boss fight and you need just more damage, you can run with the extra skirmisher option. Defenders, you can totally run if you are heavily investing in a Thorns build. We can go over that in a little bit later when we get to the gear section of this, or this lesson, I should say. The other option, if you have on specific boss fights, I believe that this Skeleton Defender that will negate the next attack can be quite useful in niche situations. But for general purposes, I believe the Reapers with the Corpse Generation to be the overall better pick in most situations. Really good for helping you get to the boss, but then sometimes you might actually switch to the Skirmishers for extra damage. Alright, moving on to the Skeletal Mages. The Skeletal Mages are your backline of your army, and they will end up doing most of the damage, while your frontliners are occupying the enemy and doing whatever it is they do. You have three different types of mages. We have Shadow, Cold, and Bone. So Shadow, they can be quite useful. They shoot shadow damage, which can combine with other skills and aspects that we will go into later. It's this very specific build. Well, not really, it was very specific. So the two options we have with Shadow, so the two options we have for Shadow. Shadow mages can potentially stun your enemies, which can be useful, but I don't think it's their better option of the two. The second option is much better, in my opinion, as it just gives them more damage. It can give them an extra Shadow Bolt, which will also combine with other skills and talents that we specialize into later. And then we move on to the Cold Mages, who can potentially freeze your opponents as they attack. There are two options for the Cold Mages. The first option, you generate essence every time they attack, which is going to be very useful for essence-starved paths and focuses. And the second option for the Cold Mages is to make your opponents vulnerable whenever your mages freeze something. The Cold Mages are my preferred choice out of the three because they have a reliable form of crowd control and they do pretty solid damage, especially when combined with an aspect we'll go over later. And then lastly, we have the Bone Mages, who arguably do the most damage in some scenarios. However, whenever they attack, they sacrifice their own health. So you need to really be on top of your micromanagement and keeping them healed up through your raised skeleton, when you can summon up the priest to heal them, or by picking up blood orbs if you go into that specialization. There's lots of maintenance required to make the Bone Mages work, but I have seen them pump out some pretty solid damage. The better option of the two is to reduce the cost that they do to their health, and also the longer they live, the more damage they do. Then lastly, on to our Golem. We have Bone, Blood, and Iron. So each Golem type has their own activated ability when you use your Golem spell. The Bone Golem will do an AoE taunt, which is very useful to round up enemies. The Blood Golem will do an AoE life drain to help heal itself. And then the Iron Golem does a pretty powerful stun, and then you can end up doing some solid damage. And then we'll get into that in a moment. So for the Bone Golem, it has a taunt. And the two abilities you can choose from is each time your Bone Golem takes 20% of its maximum life as damage, it sheds a corpse. And the second option will give it more health and also give it more thorns that it receives from you. And there's a way to amplify that as well. So I typically go with the thorns option, mostly because as the tooltip reads, it says it already sheds corpses as it takes damage anyways, so I don't necessarily need that extra corpse. So I prefer just getting a little extra damage and whenever I taunt things, as so. Moving on to the Blood Golem. So I personally think that the Blood Golem is best used by Bone Mancers, as we'll get into that build at a later time. But essentially, the Bone Golem will drain life and heal itself, which is very useful if you don't have other ways to heal it. But as a summon focused Necromancer, we will typically always have our raised skeleton ability, which will produce a priest once we're at our maximum capacity and will help heal all of our minions, including the golem. So if you're running the summon build, you don't necessarily need to run the blood golem. This is more useful for solo golem builds. The first option your blood golem can take is that it absorbs 15% of the damage you will take, which is pretty useful, especially since it can heal itself. The second option the blood golem has is that while healthy, your blood golem will take less damage and do a lot more damage. However, I'm not entirely sure if it's you being healthy or your golem being healthy. If it's you being healthy, that's actually quite good. If it's the golem being healthy, that's not so good, because once it takes damage and is no longer healthy, it loses this. So of the two options, I believe the blood golem taking 15% of the damage you would take to be the better option of the two. Especially if you are a bone necromancer who might run the solo golem build. Then lastly, we have the iron golem. When you activate this ability, it will smash the ground into wherever you are currently, wherever your cursor is, and it will stun all nearby enemies. And of the two options, the first option will just help that stun do even more damage. The second option will make all enemies vulnerable after it hit smashes, like so. So now that we have our army figured out, the next thing we need to do is determine which spells we will use in conjunction with them. So, depending on if you decide to use skeletons and your golem, you're already investing 2 of your skill slots available to use those minions. So, depending on how you wish to build it, you might forego the golem and to have another spell available. As you can see here, I'm currently running with the golem and the skeletons. I'm also using Corpse Explosion, the Shadow variant, and we'll go over that in a bit why. And then our ultimate Army of the Dead, as it will help you resummon all of your army if they die. But more importantly, there's a specific aspect that ties in really well with it. Sadly, I currently, at the recording of this, I do not have that aspect, but what it does almost doubles the attack speed of your minions and gives them an incredible amount of damage reduction. So while Army of the Dead is active, your minions will be insane. As for the main abilities in your terms of your basic and your core, you have a few abilities you can take. You can take Blight, which is a projectile attack that when it collides with something will explode and do a damage over time shadow ability. Like so, and it also increase the damage of your minions and yourself. And then you can pair that pretty well with Decompose, which is a channeled ability, like so. And it'll latch onto a target and deal damage over time, and also increase the damage minions take, or your minions will deal. It's a pretty solid option, but on more tame encounters, on boss fights, it's quite good, since there's not a lot of things jumping around. But in case of big packs of enemies that have a lot of elites, it can be quite difficult to target the actual thing you want. The Decompose is pretty good because it can target anything, really, but the Blight will hit the first thing that it comes across, which can be quite annoying. So that's just only 2 of the spells we can run. Another ability we can run is Sever. And the thing about Sever is if you look in your talent tree, there's an option that it will deal more damage for each type or each minion you have while you cast it. And that will include your golem. So if you have the aspects that increase your skeleton count in terms of your melee and your range, this will do a little bit more damage. And don't let the numbers fool you. As you can see here, like, it doesn't look too impressive, but you got to keep in mind that while you do shoot it outwards, it will come back to you and hit again. So this is more of a melee attack, but it has a range option. So if things get up in your face, you can shred them quite easily with Sever. Alright, let's showcase these spells in this random pack of elites. Another skill that we have is Corpse Explosion. This will explode a corpse, like so, and deal damage. So we currently have the Blighted Corpse Explosion, which will do shadow damage over time instead of just the immediate burst. Which can be quite useful, especially with our current build. Let's move on to our skill tree. So, as mentioned before, you can go with a few different options. For the Minion build, in particular, you can go over here in the skill tree and hit keywords, and we'll select Minions so we can see which abilities and such will affect Minions. So as you can see, Decompose affects Minions by when it does damage. You and your Minions will deal 10% more in damage. So as you can see, Decompose affects Minions, and that as you're channeling, you and your Minions will do more damage to your target. This is a decent attack. It's kind of slow and it is not affected by attack speed, unfortunately, so keep that in mind. Reap is a good option because you can get damage reduction, and the more targets you hit, the more energy you regain. And you can dabble into these things, but they aren't that effective. If an enemy you hit dies within 2 seconds, you'll increase your attack speed, which can get you even more energy generation. And I believe that attack speed will also apply to other skills, not just for Reap. Another option would be Hemorrhage to get blood orbs, and we'll get to that part later down the tree. So for now, we'll just start off with Decompose, as it's an all-rounder solid attack. Reap is a good option, Hemorrhage is an option. None of these are too much better than the other. They're also they're better in different situations, so pick which one you'd prefer. On to the core skills. So no matter what build you end up going, I would highly suggest getting at least 1 point in Blight, and the 1 point into the final enhancement, Supernatural Blight. You and your Minions will deal 15% increased damage to enemies. So there are aspects in the game that will cause other abilities to create Blight, so that's why you want to make sure you always have Supernatural Blight talented. If you end up deciding to focus on Sever, go ahead and smack 5 points into there, and let's go ahead and get the Sever that deals more damage for the more Minions you have, since we're going to be running a lot of Minions. And before we leave this portion of the tree, you can go ahead and grab maybe 2 to 3 points into Hued Flesh. This will have a chance to generate even more corpses on whatever target you are hitting. And if it's a stronger monster like a boss, it will double that chance. Good for corpse generation. So now we're on to the third tree, the Corpse and Macabre skills. So most builds within Necromancer, no matter what type of Necromancer, are Blood, Bone, or Minion, or Shadow, you will be taking Corpse Explosion, as this will do solid damage, and with other talents it will help you generate more damage and essence generation too. And then there's 2 different options. If you were to run the Shadow build with Minions, the Blighted Corpse Explosion is a really solid choice. And actually, I think it's a solid choice all around for any Minion build, as you're not really going to be getting things slowed, stunned, or vulnerable too often with this mode. Then, go ahead and you can upgrade your Skelelton Warriors 3 times for Skelelton Warrior Mastery. If you decide to go with a Thorn variant build with the Minions, you can go ahead and invest points into Spiked Armor. Though, if you're limited on points, depending on how you go, you can skip that for now. So then go ahead and make sure you grab 1 point of Grim Harvest, which will help you get some essence generation. But make sure you grab 3 points of Fueled by Death, because anytime you consume a corpse, whether it's by exploding it or by summoning a minion, you will do 9% more damage for 6 seconds. So you can put more points into Grim Harvest, however, the Minion build is generally not too essence starved, especially since you have those cold mages giving you essence. Now, depending on how you wish to do your build, if you run with the Golem or not, if you run with a Golem, you might not need to get Blood Mist because your Golem can do some stuff for you to help you survive. But if you're not running a Golem, you might want Blood Mist, or if you're in harder difficulties or harder situations, Blood Mist is our only defensive, more or less, with the Necromancer. This can get you out of all sorts of dicey situations if you're crowd controlled, for example. But for now, if you're running the Golem, we will not take this because we are unlimited scale slots. Moving on to the curse section, you can run curses with the minions. Both of these are pretty solid, though an Iron Maiden build with a Thorns minion build could be quite impressive to see, as enemies will take damage as they attack things, and then your minions will be able to, withstand it a little bit better, and also deal out some more damage on top of the Thorns. And then you will be able to get yourself healed whenever an enemy dies while afflicted with Iron Maiden. However, as you can see, the Decrepify is what affects our minions in that anything below 10%, your minions will just straight up execute them. So that could, there's merit in that as well. And it also, Decrepify also reduces the damage your minions take, and anybody takes. And it also slows minions, or enemies as well, so which that could be really useful against very fast-moving elite mobs, for example. But if you're not going to decide to run curses due to our limited skill slots, go ahead and just put, well, at the very least, make sure you grab 3 points of your Skeletal Mage Mastery. There can be arguments made for Death's Embrace and Death's Reach. Death's Embrace is really good, especially if you go with the Reap ability, since that will all stack together. Close enemies will take 6% more damage to you, and you take 9% less from them. So that is always a good option if you go with Reap. And even if not, because a lot of things will be up in your face anyways. So this is where the build gets a little bit different. It's all based on your preference and what flavor you're going with. So if you're going with a shadow build with your minions, as you can see here, these two skills will affect them. Gloom is a really good choice. You could pick 3 points of this and you will be happy. The Terror ability is useful, however, it's only really useful if you're utilizing crowd control, as Darkness skills will deal bonus damage to enemies who are slowed and enemies who are stunned or immobilized. So if you get all of those things happening, like say if you're running with a team of other heroes and whatnot, that will be able to help stun things or immobilize them, and absolutely run Terror. If you're just doing it yourself, you might not have the ways to do that, unless you talent into it or you have aspects that do it. So you can skip Terror overall. Now, depending on, again, your aspects and some of your skills, if you're using Hemorrhage or other ways to generate blood orbs, or if you're running the like a more blood version of minions, then you can go ahead and grab this Transfusion skill, as every time you grab a blood orb, you will heal your minions for 45% of that amount if you invest 3 points into this. Again, it's very niche, and sometimes you might have things that will support it, such as my leg enchantment here, which consuming a corpse has a good chance to spawn a blood orb, which can be quite useful. So it's only really a niche situation if you have things that can support this. Otherwise you can skip that, and this is good enough for now. Now this is where the most crucial part of any minion build, no matter how you look at it. You're going to want to have all the points in all of this stuff down here. All that in essence will make it so your Skeleton Priest can almost essentially heal your minions to full health every 5 seconds. Yeah, it says 60%, but more often than not, your skeletons will be pretty decent shape before the heal goes off, and then once it does, they just get fully healed. Death's Defense. This is arguably the most crucial skill you need to get on this talent tree, as it will make it so your minions will not get one shot by anything. They can't lose more than 30% of their maximum health unless a boss, say, has very fast multiple strong strikes, then your minions will get wiped out, but this is a must-have. Then Inspiring Leader. This can be used for you and your minions, and without the minions too, so this is something that most people don't know. No matter what build you have, you should always have Inspiring Leader, because as long as you're healthy, and as you can see there, as long as you have more than 80% of your health, you always do 12% more attack speed. But this also benefits our minions too. And then we have Hellbent Commander. You and your minions deal 30% damage, increased damage, when you are close to them. And you will generally always be with your mages, so always get this spell. Now, it's up to you whether or not you want to increase put all your points into it, but that's up to you if you want to mess around with that. And then, of course, we need to grab Army of the Dead, and both upgrades. The first one will make it so your volatile skeletons will leave corpses behind, and the last ability will let you just summon all of your minions. So this is really good if you need to refuel your army, or if you just want to just go ham, especially if you have the aspect that increases your attack speed and damage reduction while you use this. And then, lastly, we have our key passives. So most people would think, oh, if you're using a summoning build, just use Kalen's Edict. This is good, as it will make your minions attack faster and double it if you have more than 7 minions, which you will have in this build. This key passive is okay, but you must realize anytime you take damage, this goes away. So as long as you haven't taken damage in the last 3 seconds, your minions will be attacking faster, which is neat. But let's be realistic here, you will always be taking damage at some point. Maybe you might get this to last a couple seconds, but more often than not, you will not. So I prefer going with Shadow Blight. Anytime you do any kind of shadow damage, you and your minions will deal extra damage to those who are inflicted with Shadow Blight. So cause shadow damage to anything, and all of your things will take increased damage. And then every 10th time an enemy receives shadow damage from you or your minions that are affected by Shadow Blight, they'll take additional damage. Plus, there are plenty of skills and aspects that tie into the Shadow Blight, notably using the Shadow Mages over your Cold Mages. Keep in mind, this ability tree that we have here, this is just a generic one. Do not feel like you can't deviate from this. This is just a guideline. If you get a certain aspect or some items that might be really nice, feel free to switch to that or meld that into the build. You can definitely run a bone minion Necromancer. It doesn't have to be a solo bone Necromancer. You can run blood. Or maybe you might find some other aspects that we did not go over in this build tree. We'll get into that now as we move on to the aspects. Legendary aspects are a very important part of your time within Sanctuary. There are plenty of powerful magics and effects to be had, with some crucial aspects that truly make a seasoned Necromancer's army powerful. First, we'll go over these crucial aspects, as well as others that are quite strong in their own right, and some that completely alter your build entirely. Starting with the utility aspects that simply increase the maximum number of Skelelton Warriors and Mages you have, and the Bloodgetter for Warriors and Viscous for Mages. These are utility aspects, again, which can only be applied to shields, helmets, chests, gloves, boots, and amulets, of course. However, I strongly encourage putting at least one of these on a pair of boots, which can only acquire utility aspects, and put the other one on a chest or helmet. However, those can also receive a defensive aspect. There is one other useful utility aspect in the Coldbringer, which allows your cold mages to create a blizzard, a 6-second AoE storm that continually damages and slows enemies within it, doing pretty decent damage, honestly. You can apply this aspect to your helm or chest, whichever one isn't being taken up by the minion count increase. There's really only one defensive that we'll be concerned with here, and that is the Hardened Bones aspect, which provides a flat 15 to 20% damage reduction, so long as you have 7 or more minions active, which only applies to you, not the minions. I personally run with a shield, and I would place this aspect on it. If you haven't acquired the Coldbringer, or are opting to go without, you can use this aspect in its place on your remaining chest or helmet. On to the offensive aspects. Frenzied Dead, which simply increases your minions' attack speed the more they hit. Aspect of Reanimation, which increases their damage by 20 to 30% so long as they've been alive for longer than 10 seconds. This one only applies to skeletons, however. The aspect of the Unyielding Commander, which is the one we've been referencing this entire chapter, that substantially increases your minion attack speed by 70 to 100%, while Army of the Damned is active. All of these aspects form the core line of magics, which will get you through most of your endeavors across Sanctuary. Those 3 aspects can only be applied to 4 available items: gloves, rings, amulets, and weapons, which when applied to amulets and weapons will be even further amplified. So just choose wisely on which item slots you're using. However, now we'll go into some aspects that will alter your path. Blighted aspect and the aspect of decay both amplify the effects of Shadow Blight. Though, if you had to choose between the two, Blighted aspect is better overall since it can increase all damage you do by up to 120% for 6 seconds, which is up to 180 on an amulet and up to 240 on a two-handed weapon. Aspect of the Empowering Reaper is the reason why we scaled into 1 point of the upgraded Blight skill, as critical strikes with Sever have up to 20% chance on a crit to cast a free Blight, which deals up to 60% more damage than usual. Slap that on a two-hander and you double that chance and the Blight damage even further. Combine this with Greaves of the Empty Tomb, which is a unique item. While it is rare, you can't get it, which further enhances Sever, creating a pool of shadow along the path that your Spectral Reaper takes. Aspect of Plunging Darkness causes Bone Prison to also spawn a free cast of Blight, this time up to 100% increased damage. Again, doubled on a two-hander for 200%. And lastly, Death Speaker's Pendant, a unique amulet which allows you to play a blood-based Minion Mancer, by causing all of your minions to cast Blood Surge when you do, albeit at a mini version, which deals increased damage per target hit, up to 50%. A pretty interesting playstyle, but only time will tell if it is superior to the other summoning builds. There are other generic aspects and unique items I have not discussed here, but I will let you discover them and experiment with them on your own. Let's get into the thick of it with the Paragon boards. Here we are on the Paragon board system. It can be a little intimidating and daunting at first, but I will walk you through this and it will make sense, and I'll show you which paths to take. So, first things to note is this is our first Paragon board. It doesn't look too exciting. It's mostly just stat increases and resistances. Never pick resistance at the recording of this, as that is not a very good attribute to have. So we're going to have to try to make a path to get up to this gate, because once we click on the gate, we'll be able to add a more specialized board, and we'll get to that in a moment. So let's just make a quick path. Make sure to grab the damage increase, because obviously the more damage you do, the better. And then you'll also notice there's a secondary affix on each of these nodes. If the requirements are a bonus, I should say, not an affix. So to get a little bonus on here, and if you have a requirement that it's met, you will get that bonus. So I have surpassed the 160 willpower, so I get another 10% damage, because normally this is a 10% damage buff. And then you get both, and it's 20. And we'll make our way up to this red thing right here, which is a glyph socket. And if you look on our left side of our screen, we have our glyphs. You can unlock these by doing Nightmare Sigils or just finding them out in the wild. And to upgrade them, you will need to do Nightmare Sigils. For the intents of mastering your minions, there's a few specific glyphs that are going to contribute to that. There's a rare glyph called Mage, which makes all of your Skelelton Mages deal 4.2% more damage for every 5 intelligence pushes within the range. So, as you can see here, you put the glyph in, and there's that red border. That's everything that's in that range. So anything that has an intelligence, if we increase this intelligence right here, look at that. 4.2% Skelelton Mage damage. And then, as you can see here, the bonus here is give your mages more resistance to all elements. Whoop-de-doo. Not too exciting, but if you can see a spot that has a lot of intelligence, like this first spot right here, there's plenty of it. You can make your Skelelton Mages do quite a good amount of damage. However, I'm not currently running that with the build I was using before this. We will, I believe that was, yes, this one. All right, so I am currently running the Darkness glyph on my main Minion build, as every time you push this willpower in the nearby area, you gain 2% more shadow damage, and we do a lot of shadow damage in our build. But the bonus is whenever you or your minions deal shadow damage to an enemy, that enemy deals 2% reduced damage, up to 10 for 5 seconds. So I'm not too worried about my minions doing shadow damage at the moment, as I'm doing a lot of shadow damage. So I'll just end up making them do 10% less damage overall. That's to me and to my minions. So now that we have this, we need to make sure we pick up some willpower. And willpowers are the heads with the little triangle or hood or whatever you want to call it on them. So let's just go ahead and grab some of that. As you can see here, it's only at 25. That's okay. So there's not too many willpower things within its radius currently, as right now it's hang on a second. Okay. So currently, as you can see, there's not very many willpower nodes within its border. So what we're going to need to do is run some nightmare sigils to upgrade this glyph. As you can see there, it says the next radius size is at level 15. Currently it's level 1. So we're going to need to do a few nightmare sigils to increase that, so that this red border will encompass the rest of the willpower nodes. Notably this +7 and this +5. And then we'll get our bonus to do reduce shadow damage. Alright, let's go ahead and grab the extra damage here. We'll get that. I guess we don't need that armor. Okay, so now that we've gotten to the end of our board, now we can attach a we can do an attachment. So with this minion build, this the cult leader board, the first selection available, is actually makes a lot of sense for us. So you can click on preview and you can see what this entails and where certain key nodes lie. So the one that we're going to obviously want to get is the cult leader. Your minions deal 15% increased damage for each minion type you have active, which means Skelelton Warriors, Skelelton Mage, and Golem, which is the reason why you see me running my Golem currently, because I want to get the maximum damage possible. But you don't have to do that, because 30% damage increase is still pretty solid, but I want the 45, so I'm using all three. And I am using my Golem and trying to make that work as well. So if you say you want to get a certain piece of the board and want to move on to the next area, you can rotate it to your fit as you see fit. Say you just want to get this stuff and then go left and then keep going that way. But we're going to rotate it back to how it was, because I think how it started off is just fine for our build here. Just double check. Actually, I think we'll go this way. Alright, yeah. So I decided to rotate the board so that our glyph socket is closest to us, because all of these ones in the center and to the right are what we want to get right away. And then we'll eventually get the cult leader and the increased Skelelton Warrior damage, and we can go up here to get the Skelelton Mage. Don't really care about getting the more minion life and minion armor. It's not too crucial to the build. Alright, so let's go ahead and start investing points into... Well, first we have to attach the board. Now we can go ahead and start putting points into our board. Get the damage reduction. Even more damage reduction. Let's get it all. We don't need to get the dexterity though. Even though it says here you need 260 dexterity in order to get the enhancement bonus. But we'll get to that later. We'll grab this one though. Alright, so now that we're at our glyph socket, we are going to take the Dead Razor glyph. Paragon nodes within the range gain 20% bonus to their damage, or the minion damage and damage reduction modifiers. And there's plenty of damage reduction and damage increases right here. So let's go ahead and slot that in here. And then the bonus, if we get 40 intelligence within the radius range, whenever your minions deal damage to an enemy, that enemy takes extra damage from you and your minions. And it just stacks. Pretty solid. So let's go ahead and get some intelligence, and let's get all this minion damage of stuff over here. Grab the willpower. Minion damage. Oh, where are we at now? It's 260. Oh, we need dexterity. I believe the willpower was for something else. Anyhow. Let's go ahead and grab some more intelligence, and we're going to make our way to the Puppeteer, which will increase our minion damage even further. And then as you upgrade our glyph socket, we'll eventually be able to expand it so that it encompasses the center area, increasing our minion damage, as well as the other two damage reduction nodes. So instead of being 5%, it'll be 6%, and that's just, eventually it'll all stack up. All right. We will go up here this way because we're going to want to grab the skeletal mages. Actually, no. We'll go to the left. Go ahead and grab our minion damage, minion attack speed, minion damage, more minion damage on top of that. Grab all of this. And then we're going to move up. Intelligence. We'll increase skeleton mage damage. Unfortunately, we have to take one of these skeleton resistance to our mages. Magic resistance as a node is not very good, just with how it is implemented currently. But it is fine for now, since we need to grab the other skeleton damage, or skeleton mage damage, the skeleton mage rare node, and the other skeleton damage. Alright, that looks good. Now let's move to our left here from the Puppeteer, and we're going to make our way to the center. Bam. There we go. Now we got the 30 to 45% more minion damage, based on how many minions we got. Now we can go back here. We now have enough intelligence, so we're getting that bonus. We're almost at enough dexterity, and this one needs a little bit more willpower. What about you? You need more willpower too. That's fine. As we make our way to the next gate. Alright, let's go ahead and grab the intelligence here. We'll grab this willpower, Skelelton Warrior damage, Skelelton Warrior armor, and damage. Grab the Skelelton Warrior infused warrior, Skelelton Warrior damage, dexterity, intelligence, dexterity. Is that enough dexterity for us? Almost. And almost enough willpower. Grab dexterity, strength, willpower, and on to the next board. Alright, so now we have enough willpower for our Overlord node. We have enough for our glyph socket. We have good for our custody. We're good for infused warrior. And we're good for our infused casters. So our board is pretty much complete, at least for this first section. Now, depending on which route you wish to take, we can go to our next board. We can either go with the Golem build, which is what I'm trying to work on. I might need some more aspects to make this work, but you can see a preview of the board here. If we were to go the Golem route, we will choose Golem damage and Golem life. Obviously, the hulking monstrosity is a good one to get. Golem armor and resistance elements is probably not as good. Borrowed strength, damage while golems are active, and the armor could be useful. Damage is always nice. Damage armor or golem armor and intelligence may not be as impactful. Frenzy Golem is more damage and attack speed. That's always fantastic. Trying to figure out which ones we want to take. No matter what, we're going to want to try to get the hulking monstrosity somehow. So this one's good. I think this would probably be the route we would take, so we can get to the glyph. Alright, so we rotated the board so that we can access the glyph socket pretty quickly. We can access the attack speed and damage for the golem. And then we also with the golem damage and intelligence increase for us. And then we'll make our way around to get the hulking monstrosity. That's if you decide to go with the golem build. Otherwise, the other option I think would be quite useful is the wither build, which will make your shadow damage over time, which the main node here, your shadow damage over time effects would have a 5% chance to deal extra bonus damage each time they deal damage. And it's increased by 1%, and bonus damage is increased by 2.5% for each 50 willpower you have. So let's go ahead and preview this one. And this board, as we can see here, we take less damage if we do shadow damage to people. There's the legendary node right there in the corner. Potion and healing and maximum life, that's okay, not terrible. Shadow damage affected by shadow damage over time effects, and more damage to elites, so this is pretty solid. Lots more damage from shadow over time. There's just some random stats and shadow resistance. Don't really care about that. Lingering Shadow, some more shadow damage over time. Nothing wrong with that. Malediction, more shadow damage. And that's probably ultimately where you want to go. But that's if you decide to go with the shadow build. And then if you decide to go with the blood minion build, which I think would be quite fun to use, either with the blood orbs or with the overpowered version, which you end up using blood surge. Both of these could be good options. As for our next board, it really depends on which route you decide to take. If you want to try to use the Golem, since there's a lot of things that will benefit having all of your minions out, absolutely go for the Golem. The things to watch out for. The other two options to pick would be the Wither board, for if you're going with the Shadow route, and if you're going to going with the aspect that gives all of your minions your blood surge, then perhaps you might want to invest in the Bloodbath or the Blood Begets Blood boards. Both of them are solid choices. Of course, the Blood Begets Blood and the Bloodbath are more in line for the Blood build, but you can use them for your minions. But do keep in mind, you won't be really using Fortified, so a lot of the Fortified stuff you would need to avoid. Of the two, I'd probably go with the Blood Orb version, because it's pretty solid. As it would turn out, I could go on for a few hours talking about the different things you can do with the Paragon board system. But, in the interest of time, I think we shall wrap up this chapter here. We may go more in depth even further on the Paragon board, but I think this is a nice little taste, and I hope this cleared up some things for you regarding minions and how they work. I know I didn't really go over the items too much, but there's plenty of information out there, especially the known fact that all minions get 30% of your stats. The main things to look out for are anything that increases minion health or minion attack speed or damage, all the above, as well as increases to various skill or passives. I really hope you enjoyed this chapter of my Necronomicon. By all means, if you have any comments, questions, or things you might do better, or suggest to do better, please comment below. And of course, like and subscribe for more of my Necronomicon. See you in the next one. Thank you for watching. Goodbye. Not farewell, Necromancer.